It was precisely 41 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, upon the 7th day of February in the year 2026, that the local atmospheric conditions surrounding the distinguished thoroughfare of North Rodeo Drive underwent a truly startling and profound metamorphosis, the usual ambience of muted, understated grandeur abruptly yielding to an atmosphere undeniably charged with a palpable, high-voltage form of electricity. Within this newly tense environment, the esteemed individual known as Meghan Markle, deliberately obscured from casual view behind the dark, expansive lenses of oversized eyewear and enveloped completely within the luxurious folds of a bespoke, ivory-colored cape coat that seemed practically to radiate an aura of hushed and deeply ingrained wealth, proceeded with measured steps toward the primary and most prestigious Chanel boutique situated in the heart of Beverly Hills. Her entire manner of movement possessed the refined, calculated elegance characteristic of a personage who fully anticipated that every portal of significance would swing wide open in welcoming deference well before she even arrived at the very threshold of the establishment. Indeed, she was entirely prepared for the standard, meticulously choreographed rituals that accompany elite, high-end commerce. The subtle, almost inaudible word of welcome, the seamless and immediate transition into a secluded, private shopping chamber reserved for VIP clientele, and, crucially, the undivided, reverential focus of a high-ranking store executive whose entire attention would be dedicated solely to her needs. However, the reception that she actually encountered proved to be a solid, impenetrable barrier, one without any conceivable historical precedent in the annals of such interactions. A formidable pair of security guards, standing as silent and as utterly immovable as if they had been meticulously carved from the finest, most enduring granite, positioned themselves deliberately and unyieldingly directly between the Duchess and the famous, gleaming entrance adorned with the instantly recognizable interlocking double C emblem of the fashion house. There was utterly no trace of a hospitable grin to be observed upon their faces, nor was there any frantic 11th-hour effort whatsoever to summon a floor supervisor or manager to attend to her presence at her side. One of these imposing sentries, a man who had undoubtedly witnessed a myriad of globally famous figures cross that very entrance over the years, merely met her gaze with an unwavering steadiness and articulated 10 specific words that would, in the very near future, send profound and destabilizing shockwaves through the very foundations of the global garment trade. "We have been instructed not to accommodate you at this time." For a figure who had, until this very moment, been widely celebrated across the international stage as the quintessential, contemporary inspiration for heritage luxury labels, this chilling decree represented nothing less than a breathtaking and excruciatingly public reversal of fortune and standing. This entire incident, it rapidly became clear, was far removed from a simple, easily rectified lapse in communication or a minor scheduling oversight. It was emphatically not a mere conflict regarding a mutually agreed-upon calendar appointment, nor could it be dismissed as a simple case of the establishment being temporarily shuttered for an unscheduled private gathering of internal staff. Rather, this moment was the stark, unyielding fulfillment of a conscious, final, and internationally mandated directive that had traveled with immense gravity all the way from the central, venerable offices of Chanel located upon the historic Rue Cambon in Paris, France. This was a resolution so exceedingly infrequent and so devastatingly total in its scope that those few privileged individuals permitted within the inner sanctum of the fashion house itself whispered about it in hushed tones, referring to it only as the nuclear option. Within the high-stakes, nuanced vocabulary employed by the esteemed house of Chanel, this pronouncement constituted infinitely more than a simple, regrettable rejection of entry. It was, in its truest essence, an act of complete institutional erasure from their sphere of consideration. It is imperative for all interested parties to subscribe to the channel without delay to remain fully updated on the continuing and dramatic developments of this unfolding fashion narrative. A multitude of onlookers, among whom were included several discreet employees peering out from the adjacent, competing Dior shop, looked on with undisguised fascination as the Duchess appeared, quite visibly, to undergo a profound internal freezing, turning figuratively to ice under the unexpected pressure. Her delicate fingers remained tightly gripped around her mobile communication device, suspended in the middle of composing what was surely a critical message, her entire physical frame becoming rigid and unyielding under the intense, unsparing glare of the bright California sun. For a brief, agonizing handful of moments, The resulting silence in the normally bustling area was absolutely piercing in its intensity. Then, slowly at first, the carefully maintained composure began its rapid dissolution. Eyewitnesses present at the scene later reported that she began to pace back and forth with the mechanical, repetitive movements reminiscent of a distressed clockwork doll. Her vocal volume escalating sharply as she placed a desperate, urgent call through to Prince Harry. One particular bystander offered a vivid recollection of hearing her screaming directly into the phone, loudly vowing that certain unnamed individuals would very shortly face the dire consequence of losing their prestigious employment, and vehemently asserting, with undeniable force, that absolutely no single person possessed the requisite authority or standing to inflict such a profound and public degradation upon her person. In a mere span of 20 minutes, the individual known as Harry arrived at the specified location, his countenance utterly devoid of its usual color, his strong jaw held rigidly set in a line of intense tension. He made a distinct effort to initiate a form of discourse with the chief of security stationed there, but the man offered no verbal reply whatsoever, responding only with a single, unwavering, and utterly resolute shake of his head. The established procedures, the unyielding protocol, admitted of no exceptions whatsoever. There would be no deviations permitted, not for a duke, emphatically not for a duchess, and assuredly not for any other person who might present themselves. As the digital lenses belonging to 3 separate observers began their meticulous recording, documenting those 12 minutes of enforced public isolation and social estrangement, the wider public began slowly, perhaps reluctantly, to assimilate a profoundly altered reality. The delicate velvet cord, once a symbol of access, had not simply been drawn taut and closed. It had, in fact, been powerfully surged with an invisible, high-voltage current of consequence. Concealed behind the shimmering, often misleading curtain of public perception, an immensely extensive file detailing numerous incidents had been painstakingly and systematically assembled over a considerable period, and the president of the fashion division, the formidable Bruno Pavlovsky, had already affixed his definitive signature to the ultimate and unchangeable decree. This official action signaled the unmistakable commencement of the definitive conclusion of Meghan Markle's professional and social ties to the most rarefied and exclusive strata of the Parisian aristocracy and fashion elite. The grand entrance to that esteemed sanctuary had been firmly bolted from the inside, and for the first time in a span encompassing several years, the narrative controlling the situation was definitively no longer being authored by her hand or dictated by her influence. The moment of public humiliation that unfolded visibly upon North Rodeo Drive was merely the superficial, observable vibration emanating from a much larger, monumental tectonic shift that had actually taken place many months earlier, deep within the ancient, stone-walled corridors of the venerable French establishment. To gain a true and comprehensive understanding of the profound reasons why the most storied and revered fashion institution existing upon the entire planet elected to degrade a duchess in such a starkly visible manner, one must necessarily direct their attention toward delving into the deeply confidential, top-secret files maintained by the internal brand integrity unit situated within the very heart of Chanel. In the shadows of high-level decision-making, this choice was anything but an erratic or impulsive action. Rather, it represented the carefully considered end result of a dossier so voluminous in its contents and so catastrophic in its documented implications that those individuals privy to its nature within the inner circles had privately assigned it the chilling moniker of the nuclear file. It is strongly recommended that interested parties subscribe to the channel in question to gain access to further exhaustive deep dives into the highly guarded secret files pertaining to these global luxury brands. The significant fracture in the relationship began its serious and undeniable widening a substantial 14 months prior to the tense standoff witnessed in Beverly Hills, specifically on the 5th day of December, in the year 2024. On that occasion, Meghan had arrived at the prestigious Chanel workshop located in Paris under the pretense of conducting an intimate, guided tour, supposedly to investigate what her various associates termed a cultural partnership initiative. Nevertheless, according to the testimonies provided by 4 former employees who were present on the premises that particular day, the atmosphere within the workshop rapidly cooled to an almost freezing temperature within a mere handful of minutes. It became abundantly clear that Meghan was not presenting herself as a welcomed patron or a temporary guest of the renowned institution. Instead, she conducted herself with an air of absolute authority, as though she had just been installed as the newly appointed creative director. Sources familiar with the situation indicate with certainty that she was relentlessly insistent upon gaining access to view the secret design blueprints intended for the highly anticipated 2025 Métiers collection, a level of access that is almost universally and rigorously withheld from anyone situated outside the immediate confines of the company. When the esteemed curators responsible for safeguarding the archives began to exhibit clear indications of hesitation and professional reluctance, she reportedly commenced issuing a steady stream of unsolicited and authoritative commands. She offered pointed advice that the esteemed fashion house ought to promptly shed what she critically characterized as its stifling French rigidity, in order to achieve a more resonant connection with what she perceived as a modern and compassionate public. In what proved to be the most jarring and astonishing turn of events during that visit, she allegedly made a formal petition for a specific intricate silk decorative border, a detail of the house's design, to be officially renamed in her personal honor, suggesting that her own individual identity constituted the vital, indispensable component that had been conspicuously missing from the esteemed, century-old heritage of Chanel. One employee, who understandably requested complete anonymity for fear of professional reprisal, recalled the precise, crystalline moment when the entire room descended into a profound and absolute dead silence. She utterly failed to grasp that Chanel does not exist as some kind of personal nursery created for the inflated egos of famous individuals. It is, in fact, a veritable cathedral dedicated to the highest principles of style, and within the sacred confines of a cathedral, one simply does not instruct the established clergy on the correct methods for conducting their sacred liturgy. This specific, highly charged visit served as the undeniable breaking point in a discernible and escalating pattern of conduct that had been diligently recorded and documented since the very early months of 2023. The comprehensive collection of evidentiary documents that were subsequently scrutinized with meticulous care by the high-level board of directors featured a sequence of intercepted electronic communications, messages in which representatives acting on behalf of Meghan were aggressively insisting upon receiving shared co-creative credit for a highly restricted release collection of their iconic handbags. Their demands were not those of simple collaborators seeking a cooperative arrangement. Rather, they were boldly and unequivocally demanding a seat at the very apex of the decision-making table occupied exclusively by the esteemed Wertheimer family itself. As the final days of the month of December in the year 2024 were drawing to a close, the solemn and definitive decree known as the Retrait Definitif, which translates precisely to a permanent withdrawal, received its official authorization, issued by the esteemed figure of Bruno Pavlovsky, who holds the distinguished title of president of the fashion division at the illustrious House of Chanel. This particular regulation stands as the most severe and stringent measure available within the brand's arsenal, reserved exclusively for those individuals who have been unequivocally judged to have committed a profound betrayal of the intellectual trust held by the House, or for those whose very presence poses what the institution deems a significant risk of public relations pollution. The directive issued was absolute and all-encompassing in its finality. It mandated a complete cessation of all admittance to any Chanel premises, a prohibition on any form of booking, a strict denial of the privilege of borrowing any merchandise, and, perhaps most critically, an absolute ban on maintaining any discernible public link or association whatsoever. The ramifications of this monumental decision were felt with immediate, though initially unspoken, intensity throughout the relevant circles. The name belonging to the Duchess was swiftly and silently expunged from the carefully curated roster of invited guests slated to attend the forthcoming exhibition scheduled to take place in the city of Manchester. Furthermore, managers situated across numerous international regions were promptly furnished with what was termed a Level 1 non-engagement directive, a formal designation that effectively branded her as persona non grata across every single global territory under Chanel's influence. While the wider general public might continue to observe a duchess elegantly attired in the products of high fashion, those within the exclusive echelons of the industry were, in fact, witnessing the methodical, almost surgical erasure of a woman from the very ledgers and archives of the fashion world. Behind the securely closed doors of executive suites, the preferred and chilling term utilized to characterize her new status was tactically uninsurable. This severe reaction stemmed not merely from the catalogue of demands she had presented, but rather from the profound element of unpredictability she introduced into a sphere of commerce that fundamentally thrives upon the reliable currency of consistency and unwavering caution. The leadership at Chanel had, over time, arrived at the inescapable realization that upon every occasion that Meghan Markle entered a setting, the entire focus of the gathering invariably shifted. The conversation ceased to revolve around the intricate artistry, the meticulous craftsmanship, or the specific garments themselves, and instead became entirely and exclusively centered upon her personage. For a venerable fashion house that has successfully navigated the treacherous waters of two devastating global conflicts and countless economic upheavals by steadfastly maintaining a position above the clamor and noise of transient trends, the specific brand of sensational controversy so often associated with Meghan was regarded as an existential and fatal danger to the very honor of their corporate identity. Consequently, the confrontation that unfolded in Beverly Hills on the 7th day of February in the year 2026 was emphatically not the result of a mere oversight or a blunder committed by some low-ranking security officer. Instead, it represented the public execution of a sentence that had been formally passed down a full 12 months prior within the very heart of the French capital. The locks had been firmly engaged, the bolts thrown home with decisive force, and for the inaugural time in the entirety of her adult life, the Duchess encountered a doorway that no degree of royal standing or powerful media influence possessed the capability to unlatch or persuade to open. As this compelling chronicle unfolds, it is essential to remember to subscribe to this channel so that you may never miss a single subsequent moment of this high-stakes and significant narrative as it continues to develop. That visible public clash on the prestigious rodeo drive served as the ultimate explosive culmination. Yet the fuse that ignited this entire sequence of events had actually been lit a full 3 years earlier, during a specific period now spoken of in carefully hushed tones within the high-fashion epicenters of both Paris and New York, a time retrospectively labeled the Mood Board War. This era spanned several intense months situated squarely in the middle of the year 2023, a duration during which the grand, ambitious designs conceived by the Duchess of Sussex collided headlong and irrevocably with the impenetrable historical bulwark that constitutes Chanel's enduring legacy. This was an affair vastly transcending a simple, superficial disagreement over visual aesthetics. It was fundamentally a core conflict rooted deeply in two entirely antithetical ideologies concerning the nature and deployment of influence. In the month of May of that same year, 2023, the business counselor representing Meghan at the Archwell organization, a woman named Vanessa Lauren, initiated a formal dialogue with the United States Media Office representing Chanel. The designated intermediary facilitating this initial exchange was Zara Carmichael, an individual formerly renowned as a public relations specialist for Goop, who possessed a notable reputation for successfully brokering complex agreements between prominent Hollywood figures and established European luxury houses. The proposition presented during this outreach was exceptionally audacious. The creation of a strictly limited-run philanthropic collection to be titled Archwell x Chanel. The central advocacy of this comprehensive proposal called for a deliberate and potent fusion between the transformative and enduring legacy established by Coco Chanel and the contemporary, purpose-led branding ethos that Meghan herself championed. Within the meticulously guarded digital confines of a private server, which had unfortunately succumbed to unauthorized intrusion and was subsequently recovered, there existed internal documents originating from a highly reputable public relations agency, documents that chronicled the very initial response from the esteemed house of Chanel. This first official reaction, as evidenced in the recovered materials, was characterized by an almost impeccable, sophisticated veneer of politeness, steeped in the very essence of traditional French decorum. Nevertheless, when one delved into the more candid, internal commentary generated during that inaugural discussion, the true sentiment expressed was considerably more forthright and unvarnished. Indeed, a senior executive occupying a position of considerable influence within the organizational hierarchy characterized the bearing and conduct of the personnel representing Archwell as decidedly overstepping the established boundaries, and further noted that it evinced a clear and unmistakable demonstration of a profound lack of respect for the venerable, century-old architectural foundation of the brand itself. Notwithstanding these subtle, yet potent cautionary signals that permeated the preliminary exchanges, arrangements were meticulously finalized for a formal presentation to take place on the 14th day of June, in the year 2023, within the hushed confines of an exclusive, secluded meeting chamber offering panoramic vistas overlooking the verdant expanse of Central Park in the bustling metropolis of New York City. That particular rendezvous, It would later be indelibly etched into the collective annals of the global fashion industry, marking the precise juncture at which the nascent connection between the two entities began its irreversible descent into conflagration. Meghan made her entrance, bearing with her a meticulously prepared digital slide presentation, the title of which was boldly proclaimed, Reimagine Chanel, from exclusivity to empathy. To the seasoned leaders seated across the polished expanse of the conference table, this very title was perceived instantaneously, without reservation, as a calculated and direct challenge, a profound affront to their established principles. The entire, painstakingly constructed financial and philosophical framework upon which the edifice of Chanel is solidly founded rests fundamentally upon the unwavering concept of exclusivity. Therefore, the very notion of employing empathy as a primary marketing instrument was immediately and collectively regarded as a process of dilution, a deliberate watering down of the institution's inherent, rarefied aura. As recounted by 3 separate individuals who were present within the confines of that tense room, the ensuing presentation unfolded as a relentless sequence of rather extreme and demanding stipulations, which were, perhaps deceptively, framed and offered under the guise of constructive creative input. Meghan proceeded to champion a series of proposed silk garments wherein the iconic, instantly recognizable double C insignia would be entirely relinquished, or, at the very least, relegated to a secondary position, being awkwardly paired with a delicate, understated floral motif intended to serve as a symbolic representation of the Archwell organization. She forcefully argued that the venerable fashion label was in dire need of a fundamental transformation if it intended to successfully resonate with and capture the attention of a younger and markedly more socially conscious cohort of consumers. Reports subsequently suggested that the palpable tension permeating the atmosphere within that space reached a critical breaking point when the discussion pivoted toward a proposed collection of accessories, specifically focusing on environmentally conscious handbags. At this juncture, Meghan put forward the specific suggestion that the flagship item within this newly envisioned collection ought to be bestowed with the nomenclature, the Diana. When a legal counsel representing Chanel, adopting a posture of measured inquiry, posed the question of whether she had, in fact, secured the requisite formal assent from either the estate of the Spencer family or the royal collection to utilize the revered name of Princess Diana for the purposes of a commercial, profit-generating fashion enterprise, Meghan is reported to have leaned forward with pronounced intensity and declared with unwavering conviction, "I carry her legacy deeply within the very core of my soul. I possess no requirement for any form of external permit in order to render a tribute to my own mother-in-law." A profound, almost suffocating silence descended upon the entirety of the room. One of the attendees later recalled with vivid clarity that the assembled Chanel delegation appeared utterly stunned, as if they had just been forced to witness an act of profound religious desecration. Within the rarefied and deeply traditional world of French haute couture, the adherence to lineage and established practice is not merely a suggestion to be selectively reworked for the benefit of a fleeting news release. Rather, it is considered a sacred, inviolable obligation. Should the unfolding narrative of these events prove as utterly compelling to you, the reader, as it has been to us, we implore you to consider subscribing to this channel without delay. The entire precarious set of circumstances rapidly devolved from what might have been characterized as a private, albeit sharp, disagreement into a full-blown organizational crisis a mere 7 days hence. During the latter portion of June, in the year 2023, a compilation of inspirational visual materials, which were allegedly the product of the Archwell design team's conceptualization, found their way into the public domain through an unauthorized leak onto a highly restricted, niche message board dedicated to fashion commentary. Subsequently, these images were swiftly cataloged and republished by a collection of anonymous gossip websites that monitor such releases. The leaked material conspicuously displayed historical photographs featuring Princess Diana gracefully wearing iconic Chanel ensembles, which had been digitally overlaid and juxtaposed with monochromatic photographs depicting Meghan adopting precisely identical poses. The overarching title that framed this disconcerting visual juxtaposition was starkly provocative: From Grief to Glamour, the Heirloom Line. For the legal department, situated on the prestigious Rue Cambon, this unauthorized dissemination served as the irrefutable and definitive evidence of potential misconduct and transgression. It powerfully indicated that Meghan's true objective was not the pursuit of a genuine, mutually beneficial collaboration, but rather the acquisition position of a strategic tool through which she intended to meticulously rewrite her personal narrative, utilizing the esteemed and deeply rooted history of the Chanel house as a mere backdrop or canvas for her own purposes. An internal alarm, specifically concerning ethical boundaries, was immediately triggered throughout the organization. The subsequent internal memorandum, composed entirely in the French language and formally disseminated to the collective board of directors, asserted with unyielding clarity: this endeavor does not represent a harmonious synergy between brands. This constitutes a blatant attempt at the unauthorized misappropriation of a venerable brand identity. This individual is manifestly seeking to utilize this esteemed fashion house as a defensive bulwark against the pressures of individual public controversy. On the 26th day of June, in the year 2023, a session of utmost gravity, a crisis convocation, was formally assembled in the venerable city of Paris. Following swiftly upon this initial meeting, specifically by the first day of July of that same year, the tentative decision reached during that initial gathering was formally transmuted into a permanent decree. Immediately thereafter, every single regional supervisor, without exception, was duly furnished with a directive explicitly labeled as a no-go order pertaining to the entirety of the Archwell project. All conceivable avenues of communication and interaction were mandated to be severed with immediate effect, without any delay whatsoever. There was to be no formal, written document conveying a refusal, no prepared statement disseminated to the media outlets, and absolutely no public proclamation made regarding this abrupt cessation. Within the rarefied and often unforgiving universe of high fashion, it is well understood that the most ruthlessly effective and cold-blooded methodology for bringing about the demise of an endeavor is simply to withdraw entirely the essential sustenance, the very oxygen, of attention that keeps such ventures alive. Consequently, the ambitious undertaking withered away and expired in an atmosphere of absolute and profound silence. Nonetheless, the repercussions stemming from this sudden termination were anything but quiet or muted when observed behind the closed doors and in the private corridors of influence. Individuals known to be closely affiliated with the Duchess offered their perspectives, asserting with conviction that she did not process this rejection merely as a pragmatic commercial determination, but rather perceived it as a deeply personal affront, a direct and intentional slight aimed at her person. In a series of electronic missives that subsequently found their way into the public domain through a clandestine method of unauthorized release, it was reported that she conveyed her sentiments to a confidant, stating with palpable emotion, "They skillfully utilized my established reputation to generate considerable excitement and buzz within the confines of their private discussions, only to decisively slam the door shut the very moment they had successfully extracted all the desired intelligence they sought. Be assured, I shall ascend far beyond their limited scope and influence. That is something I invariably accomplish." As the springtime of 2024 began to unfold, the perceptible alteration in her public presentation became evident to those astute observers who possessed the necessary context to recognize the subtle shifts. Meghan commenced a systematic process of excising any and all references to the esteemed house of Chanel from her public discourse and spoken engagements. The familiar, classic staples of the brand, the traditional ballet slippers and the exquisitely quilted leather purses, were deliberately relegated to obscurity, supplanted instead by pieces selected from the collections of Valentino, Carolina Herrera, and Self-Portrait, design houses that were widely regarded as being more readily amenable to both the potent leverage of celebrity endorsement and the incessantly accelerated rhythms of contemporary brand marketing. A specialist formerly engaged to advise on Meghan's hair and wardrobe for a major streaming production recalled that the Duchess developed an intense preoccupation with demonstrating unequivocally that she possessed absolutely no reliance upon or need for the approval of the French sartorial elite. She was frequently heard to pose the pointed question, "Does this particular ensemble possess sufficient French illusion to convey the intended impact?" At this juncture, the pursuit had clearly transcended mere aesthetic preference. It had transformed into a dedicated quest for palpable retribution enacted entirely through carefully curated visual messaging. Nevertheless, this unfolding mood-board war, as it came to be known in certain circles, inadvertently generated a collateral consequence that the team surrounding Meghan had entirely failed to anticipate or account for in their strategic planning. The world of high fashion operates as an exceedingly small, intricately interwoven community where intelligence flows with astonishing velocity. The narrative concerning the specific association with the Diana purse and the subsequent, determined maneuver to supplant the iconic Double C logo traveled with the speed of a veritable wildfire through the executive boardrooms of the colossal LVMH and Kering conglomerates. The ramifications extended far beyond a mere refusal from the venerable Chanel. It signaled that the entire upper echelon of European luxury goods houses was effectively closing ranks. By the time the 2025 fashion season was officially inaugurated, the Duchess discovered herself situated in an increasingly precarious and untenable position. Her considerable fame was fundamentally predicated upon the aura of being a globally recognized figure within a particular sphere that, ironically, was beginning to pivot dramatically toward the tenets of quiet luxury and the subtle aesthetics associated with established generational wealth, the very foundational elements she had aggressively attempted to disrupt and redefine. The 12 minutes of profound, deliberate silence observed at the establishment located in Beverly Hills in the year 2026 served as the conclusive, definitive full stop punctuating a sentence that had been meticulously composed during those intense and friction-laden strategy sessions held back in 2023. Chanel had employed the strategy of patient observation, watching closely, and ultimately, they executed their calculated countermove. They had effectively illustrated a fundamental truth. While a globally renowned personality possesses the capacity to dominate the daily news cycle, it is invariably the enduring fashion house that maintains ultimate control over who gains entry through its prestigious portals. The protracted moodboard war had thus reached its unavoidable and definitive conclusion, and in the final reckoning, the Duchess had not only failed to secure victory in this engagement but had, in fact, been comprehensively and permanently erased from that particular landscape of influence. The rarefied, glittering corridors of Parisian haute couture, typically draped in the rich velvet of unspoken understandings, are in fact gilded with a highly polished gold of deliberate discretion. However, when the powerful personages who inhabit these spaces turn their backs upon a specific figure, that ensuing silence resonates with an impact far exceeding the resonance of any overt, physical gesture, functioning instead as a complete and total annulment of an established personal brand. Identity. In the measured weeks that subsequently unfolded following the highly visible, documented moment of rejection observed at the esteemed Chanel establishment situated in Beverly Hills, a profound and utterly synchronized withdrawal commenced across the very most influential and commanding fashion institutions domiciled within the borders of France. Stretching from the exclusive, high-end boutiques lining the famed Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré all the way to the opulent, commanding executive offices affording panoramic vistas over the majestic Place Vendôme, the guiding luminaries and chief executives reached a singular, chillingly unanimous accord. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, was henceforth to be regarded as an unwelcome visitor within the sanctified precincts of this rarefied trade. She represented, quite simply, a significant and unacceptable liability. For those wishing to remain acutely informed regarding the subtle yet seismic shifts occurring within the ever-evolving universe of high fashion, the recommendation is to wholeheartedly subscribe to the dedicated channel for ongoing intelligence. Drawing upon highly classified intelligence, which was painstakingly secured from an exceptionally high-ranking professional operating within the very heart of the fashion industrial complex, it has been ascertained that a clandestine conclave of industry leaders convened on the 9th day of February, in the year 2026. Presiding over this pivotal session was a figure of immense stature, one holding a major leadership position within the esteemed Comite Colbert, that venerable and prestigious organization tasked with eloquently articulating and vigorously defending the collective commercial interests of France's most legendary and enduring luxury houses. The distinguished roster of attendees invited to this crucial gathering constituted a veritable roll call of the undisputed masters of global material wealth and influence, including high-level envoys dispatched from the colossal LVMH conglomerate, the parent entity overseeing such iconic names as Dior, Givenchy, and Louis Vuitton, representatives from the powerful Kering Group, the ownership structure behind Balenciaga, Saint Laurent, and Bottega Veneta, and, most certainly, key decision-makers from the privately held titan that is Chanel. Although absolutely no official, public records documenting the proceedings of this critical meeting have ever been made available for general scrutiny, a partially leaked, confidential overview of the central dialogue reveals a shared strategy characterized by a cold, almost surgical precision and calculated accuracy in its execution. The fundamental judgment rendered by this assembly was starkly transparent. Effective immediately and until any formal, internal declaration to the contrary, the Duchess of Sussex was to be systematically purged from every primary and essential list of invitations, meticulously expunged from all showroom access logs, and entirely removed from the operational spreadsheets governing influencer partnerships. The internal rationale underpinning this sweeping exclusionary action was formally categorized under the ominous heading of a PR contamination risk. Within the high-stakes arena of upper-echelon commerce, where the swift, viral dissemination of a single piece of unfavorable news can instantaneously erode the intrinsic value of a reputation painstakingly cultivated across 100 years or more, the disruptive and highly charged fame surrounding Meghan was perceived as a form of contagion against which the entire industry was unwilling to risk further exposure or accommodation. Even though the House of Chanel had been demonstrably the initial actor in this drama, executing its severance most overtly and for all to see, the other major luxury brands wasted no precious time in swiftly and effectively solidifying this newly established, invisible boundary. Dior, an institution whose very foundations are steeped in history, and which had recently been the subject of persistent, circulating rumors concerning a potential, large-scale professional collaboration with Meghan, disseminated a quiet yet firm, internal memorandum throughout its worldwide network of media and public relations teams. The directive issued was uncomplicated in its starkness. Cease the provision of any garments for her forthcoming public engagements, and immediately terminate all existing and potential future communications channels with the talent agencies currently representing the interests of the Sussex household. Even Givenchy, the esteemed design house responsible for crafting the iconic and widely celebrated bridal gown worn by Meghan in the year 2018 under the creative stewardship of Claire Wakekeller, opted decisively for a rigorous policy of complete and utter separation. While the firm deliberately abstained from issuing any sort of public statement regarding the matter, an individual possessing intimate proximity to the current design staff confirmed the palpable shift in the prevailing institutional attitude, remarking with measured finality, "Our entire institutional focus is presently directed toward nurturing new, emerging talent and celebrating enduring, timeless artistry, rather than becoming entangled in ongoing political disputes." This same source further elaborated upon the strategic calculus involved, noting with detached observation, "The association with the 2018 nuptials remains a treasured piece of our historical archive, certainly, but it absolutely does not represent the trajectory or the essence of our future endeavors." The trend of deliberate distancing reached its apex when Balmain reportedly took the drastic measure of canceling a meticulously scheduled digital promotional event that was intended to showcase an in-depth, featured conversation between the celebrated creative director Olivier Rousteing and the Duchess herself. This specific project, which had been thoughtfully constructed around the sophisticated theme of digital feminism, was abruptly scrapped a mere 4 days before the scheduled filming date. An official who was privy to the decision-making process pointed to the escalating peril as the overriding factor, explaining with clarity, "Every single dialogue inevitably devolves into an exhaustive list of her personal grievances, rather than remaining a focused discussion centered on the artistry of the clothing itself," the executive stated plainly. "Here, in the venerable city of Paris, our entire enterprise is founded upon the cultivation and sale of dreams." Meghan, by contrast, appears to deal primarily in the currency of conflict. These two fundamentally disparate elements are, regrettably, entirely incompatible with one another. Concealed behind the shimmering, gossamer curtain that constitutes every grand fashion week spectacle, there exists an extraordinarily complex and densely woven tapestry comprised of media specialists, dedicated representatives, and the most elite, top-tier stylists, all functioning as the vigilant guardians of the coveted front-row seating arrangements. As the calendar page turned to the middle of February in the year 2026, the specific designation of Meghan had, with alarming swiftness, transformed into something akin to a grave warning symbol within the carefully curated databases maintained by these industry gatekeepers. A highly regarded European stylist, one who had previously been engaged in a significant collaborative venture with Meghan on an important magazine project that took place during the year 2019, offered a candid assessment of the prevailing atmosphere while insisting upon the absolute necessity of anonymity. The very instant her name is tentatively introduced into a conversation with a major fashion label these days, one is met with an extended, noticeable silence, invariably followed by an exceedingly polite, yet firm, redirection to an entirely different subject. This, you must understand, is the universally recognized, unspoken industry signal indicating the clear directive. Do not, under any circumstances, revisit this particular topic again. It has become, quite frankly, an expansive act of professional circumvention operating on a truly planetary scale. The palpable ramifications of this pervasive, chilling freeze became most strikingly evident when the initial preliminary roster of invited guests for the esteemed Paris Fashion Week, an event scheduled to unfold across the dates stretching from the 4th through the 11th of March in the year 2026, was circulated amongst the privileged circle of media executives and tastemakers. Meghan Markle, an individual who, not so long ago, commanded seats of honor positioned directly adjacent to the world's most profoundly influential editorial figures, was nowhere to be found upon this significant document. She was conspicuously absent from the celebrated front row at the presentations hosted by Dior. Furthermore, her name did not appear among the attendees backstage at the showings for Schiaparelli. Crucially, she was entirely missing from the exclusive guest lists for the most prestigious after-show galas held at the celebrated venue of L'Avenue. For a public figure whose entire personal brand is intrinsically tethered to the vital currency of access and the necessity of being prominently seen, this sudden, dramatic removal represented nothing less than a staggering and undeniable plummet in established status. Despite the intensifying chill and the thickening layers of professional ice surrounding her position, the dedicated team responsible for representing Meghan under the Archwell banner did not succumb to inertia, choosing instead to actively seek avenues for remedy. Investigations undertaken at the time suggest that her retained public relations firm, identified as Elmer Strategies, undertook a concerted and rather desperate effort to fundamentally recalibrate her public perception during the period spanning the 8th through the 10th of February. Reportedly, they extended offers outlining no fewer than 5 distinct conceptual strategies designed to spin a narrative of reconciliation toward major global news outlets. This included the proposition of securing a digital cover story focusing exclusively on sustainable high fashion, arranging a high-profile podcast appearance alongside the celebrated designer Stella McCartney, and even presenting a formal proposal for a highly intellectualized TED Talk, tentatively titled Reclaiming Creative Space. The response emanating from the established world of high-end publishing proved to be just as frigid and unyielding as the reaction received from the major fashion houses themselves. One seasoned editor holding a significant post at a prominent French magazine offered a stark assessment, admitting candidly, "Our considered judgment in this matter is not, in fact, predicated upon any of her personal political stances or affiliations. What we are assessing with considerable scrutiny is her demonstrated, consistent tendency toward generating unavoidable chaos. The moment she enters an environment, the very ambient energy of that space appears to be instantaneously and wholly extracted from it. The realm of high fashion fundamentally requires that the creation, the garment itself, must remain the undisputed protagonist of the narrative. In her presence, however, the protagonist invariably becomes the ensuing dispute or controversy. Across the media landscape of France, the tone of the reporting underwent a noticeable and decisive transformation, shifting entirely from one of initial interest to one of pronounced disapproval. For instance, the esteemed publication Le Figaro released a significant fashion analysis bearing a headline whose meaning translated directly to "The silence maintained by Chanel, a force more potent than any uttered words." Even the French iteration of Vanity Fair, a periodical that had previously positioned itself as a steadfast and enthusiastic advocate for the Duchess's distinct approach to personal style, subsequently published an article asserting that she had fundamentally mistaken the act of disruption for the possession of genuine authority, further cautioning its readership that the rarefied world of high fashion simply does not possess the inclination to bend or bow to the dictates of any single individual's ego. The comprehensive worldwide freeze experienced throughout the year 2026 served to definitively underscore a fundamental, structural reality concerning the mechanics of true influence. While the celebrity culture that flourishes within the American sphere often draws its sustenance and momentum from sheer clamor, viral moments, and ceaseless digital noise, the established fashion elite of Europe, conversely, derive their enduring power from the deep roots of ancestry, a profound commitment to caution, and the unassailable, definitive strength embodied in the simple utterance of the word no. By decisively and collectively shutting their ornate doors, the venerable fashion houses of Paris were engaged in far more than a mere act of slighting a potential customer. They were actively engaged in the meticulous shielding and preservation of an entire, time-honored way of conducting business and life. As one long-serving veteran of this intricate trade eloquently summarized the situation, within the specific world, doors are engineered to swing open with the utmost quietude, almost without a whisper, but when those same doors are deliberately and forcefully slammed shut, the reverberating sound echoes for an exceptionally long duration. By the midpoint of February in that year, it was tragically evident that every significant door in Paris had produced that resounding, definitive sound, leaving the Duchess standing undeniably and definitively on the exterior of a formidable fortress she had, perhaps mistakenly, once harbored the profound belief that she possessed the inherent capability to command entirely. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel to see what happens next in this story. As the weighty, imposing portals of the esteemed fashion house of Chanel were securely fastened and the entirety of the city of Paris subsequently mirrored this act of retreat and closure, the notable figure of Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, did not succumb to a period of quiet seclusion or withdrawal. Instead, drawing upon intelligence gleaned from numerous confidential internal sources, it was immediately observed that the Duchess resolutely pivoted back toward the very instruments and methodologies that had previously served her so effectively throughout her tenure as a public personality. Namely, the deployment of intricate legal stratagems, the careful crafting and dissemination of discreet public relations memoranda, and the highly calibrated application of her personal narrative as a potent source of influence and leverage. Yet, for the very first instance within the entire span of her existence navigating the currents of public scrutiny, these familiar implements proved wholly inadequate to breach the formidable, seemingly impenetrable ramparts erected by the world of high fashion. Subsequently, on the 8th day of February in the year 2026, a mere 24 hours following the tense and widely discussed confrontation that transpired in Beverly Hills, the venerable legal counsel who had long represented Meghan, known simply as Jonathan Y., is reported to have convened an urgent, high-stakes consultation with the most senior partners at the prominent New York legal establishment, Lehane and O'Donnell. The singular objective of this concentrated meeting was to meticulously investigate the feasibility of initiating a formal legal action, predicated upon claims of defamation or perhaps discrimination, leveled directly against the venerable institution of Chanel for the perceived detriment inflicted upon her esteemed public standing. The initial internal blueprint for this counteroffensive, which bore the rather dramatic internal codename of Project Salvage, sought diligently to frame the unfortunate refusal of entry at the boutique as a clear and actionable contravention of the stipulations laid out within the Unruh Civil Rights Act. Nevertheless, this meticulously prepared legal salvo was effectively neutralized and extinguished before it ever had the opportunity to be presented before the contemplation of any presiding judicial officer. A contingent of seasoned legal authorities, including a distinguished former magistrate from the California Superior Court, subjected the carefully constructed arguments to rigorous scrutiny, ultimately dismissing them summarily as nothing more than legal fantasies, asserting unequivocally that no existing statute mandates that a privately held, exclusive fashion enterprise must maintain an ongoing professional relationship with any given public figure, regardless of their stature. By the 10th day of February, the carefully constructed edifice of the planned lawsuit had been quietly shelved and relegated to history, yet the ensuing media confrontation was only just gathering momentum and beginning its true escalation. Deeply disconcerted and visibly frustrated by the unyielding barricades presented by the established judicial framework, the assembled team advising Meghan initiated what those possessing intimate knowledge of their operations refer to as the managed leak. Precisely at 17 minutes past the hour of 11 in the morning on the 9th day of February, a highly sensitive internal communication originating from Nadia Campbell, the director of communications at Archwell, was broadcast instantaneously to a carefully curated list comprising more than 40 influential figures within the upper echelons of the media landscape. The subject line of this pointed electronic dispatch read simply, "An ongoing pattern, women of color in luxury spaces." The body of the circulated email endeavored to skillfully recontextualize the incident at Chanel, attempting to recast it as merely one more unfortunate illustration within a broader, more pervasive narrative concerning systemic exclusion and entrenched gatekeeping within elite circles. It deliberately referenced the unfortunate prior conflicts Meghan had experienced with the news outlets of Great Britain and subtly implied that the sudden, pronounced coolness emanating from the fashion industry was, in fact, rooted in a foundation of unspoken, entrenched biases. Although the text of the email artfully avoided an explicit naming of Chanel, the intended target was immediately transparent to every recipient. This represented a deliberate strategic maneuver to harness the contemporary discourse surrounding social justice as a pointed instrument against a global brand that consistently cultivates an image of existing elevated far above the turbulence of quotidian political disputes. The resulting echo across the media spectrum proved to be an unmitigated catastrophe for the carefully cultivated brand identity of Archewell. In stark contrast to preceding years, when narratives of this nature were frequently embraced and amplified by the press, the collective response witnessed in the calendar year 2026 was characterized by a widespread, palpable sense of weariness and oversaturation. Of the 40 esteemed individuals who received the communication, only one solitary, relatively minor digital publication offered the courtesy of publishing an opinion piece sympathetic to their cause. The vast majority of the remainder, spanning from influential digital journals like The Cut to the venerable pages of Vogue, elected to offer no response whatsoever to the carefully orchestrated outreach. Within the secure and expansive confines of the Sussex residence nestled in Montecito, the atmosphere was reportedly steeped in an overwhelming sensation of sheer, unadulterated alarm. An employee, who subsequently tendered their resignation on the 10th day of February, later recounted that the internal workplace environment had devolved into a state of disarray and frantic activity. It was said that Meghan was forcefully insisting that her supporting staff intensify their efforts to promote the charitable dimension of their endeavors even more aggressively, urging them to remind the world of everything she had endured throughout her journey. However, it became increasingly evident that the broader public audience was simply no longer receptive to this particular dramatic script. In one inadvertently revealed message exchanged via the WhatsApp platform, a senior advisor offered a stark and sobering warning. "We are losing the interest of the room. The more we focus on the struggle, the further the brands move away from us." The final, and arguably most crushing, blow originated from within the very heart of the industry itself. On the evening of the 10th of February, a private electronic mail correspondence penned by Bruno Pavlovsky, the esteemed president of Chanel's fashion division, was illicitly shared without authorization across a specialized server utilized exclusively by established professionals within the fashion sector. This internal message, which had actually been composed weeks earlier on the 28th of January, a significant period preceding the public incident on Rodeo Drive, articulated the House's official position with crystalline clarity and finality. It explicitly stated, "There are times when keeping quiet protects the House better than saying something. We cannot be asked to take on chaos just for the sake of a celebrity." The choice regarding Markle was about strategy, not feelings. The regrettable disclosure of the Pavlovsky message served as the definitive, unmistakable signal that the exclusive and highly guarded gates of the world of high fashion had been firmly and irrevocably locked against her. This single event swiftly transformed the perception of the Duchess from that of an unfortunate subject of circumstance into a genuine liability, a bothersome complication, in the considered estimation of every significant marketing conglomerate operating across the entirety of the European continent. As the middle of that particular week unfolded, the most esteemed and celebrated public relations agencies situated in both New York City and the elegant avenues of Paris began the systematic process of inscribing the name of the Duchess onto their internal, restrictive documentation categorized as "Do Not Book" rosters. One exceptionally senior executive, holding a prominent leadership position within a premier agency, articulated the situation with stark, unvarnished bluntness during a private exchange within a secure professional communication channel, stating unequivocally, "She no longer possesses the capacity to effectively move merchandise. Her presence now only serves to steer the trajectory of the news cycle decisively in an undesirable direction." Upon the very first light of dawn breaking across the 11th day of February, the Duchess discovered herself enveloped in a profound solitude, an isolation unlike any she had previously experienced in her life. All attempts at exerting influence through legal channels had proven entirely futile. Her calculated releases of information to the press had demonstrably generated more detriment than advantage, and her previously secured standing among the arbiters of contemporary style had completely evaporated into thin air. She had, with considerable effort, attempted to force an entry into that most sacred and exclusive temple of influence, yet in her endeavor, she had critically overlooked the single most paramount and unwritten decree governing the highest echelon of the elite. Within a highly structured domain where the mere extension of an invitation constitutes the sole currency of value, those individuals who resort to physically attempting to breach the entrance are, almost without exception, never afforded the courtesy of remaining inside. The comprehensive findings emanating from the internal investigations were rendered with absolute certainty. Meghan Markle was no longer engaged in a contest for a desirable seat at a celebrated runway presentation. Rather, she was engaged in a desperate and vital struggle for the preservation of her very professional existence within an industry that had collectively, and with a singular, resounding consensus, reached the determination that it was utterly finished with the incessant clamor she generated. The ensuing silence that descended was not merely an absence of spoken words. It was the audible manifestation of an established, historic brand preparing its deliberate and measured transition toward an entirely new focus. By the 11th day of February, in the year 2026, precisely 4 days subsequent to the formal closure of the doors of the renowned establishment of Chanel on Rodeo Drive, the nature of the underlying conflict had undergone a fundamental and alarming metamorphosis, evolving from a mere contest for coveted access within the sphere of fashion into a frantic, high-stakes battle for her enduring relevance within the broader cultural landscape. The ramifications stemming from being universally placed upon an official blacklist were no longer confined to matters of exclusive, high-end apparel. This represented a complete and total structural collapse that placed the entirety of the Sussex-affiliated business enterprise under significant and immediate peril. Within the hushed, meticulously secured enclaves of Montecito and the sleek, contemporary corporate headquarters dotting Hollywood, this unfolding situation was being absorbed with a chilling and undeniable lucidity. The Duchess was no longer perceived as an asset or a beneficial association. She had regrettably become, instead, a cautionary anecdote for others contemplating similar paths. According to the most senior figures presiding over major multimedia platforms, the repercussions stemming from the aforementioned Chanel incident had impacted their pipeline of prospective deals with the force and devastating scale of a colossal tidal wave. It was widely reported that Archwell Productions had been positioned within the terminal stages of finalizing an immensely significant contractual agreement to produce a high-caliber documentary series intended to meticulously explore the intricate interplay between the lineage of royalty and the evolution of global fashion. That particular undertaking is now being summarily dismissed as entirely defunct by one key executive, who characterized it as dead. The rationale provided for this abrupt termination was not rooted in any perceived failing of the narrative subject matter itself, but rather in a catastrophic shift in the public and industry perception of the central figure involved. No established legacy brand, particularly those anchoring the realm of luxury goods, possessed any inclination to be publicly associated with an individual whose dominant current narrative revolved entirely around documented rejection by the very industry they sought to engage. A parallel and equally chilling deceleration of professional cordiality manifested within the loftiest echelons of the technology sector concentrated in Silicon Valley. A highly anticipated venture for a brand new podcast series was placed into indefinite suspension after a trio of substantial corporate sponsors summarily withdrew their commitments within a mere 48-hour window following the events that transpired in Beverly Hills. The internal justification communicated to the parties directly involved was delivered with unsparing severity. Meghan had regrettably crossed the threshold into being deemed brand toxic. One seasoned marketing professional offered the stark observation that she had ceased to captivate the demographics of consumers who truly held the purchasing power and influence. Instead of eliciting feelings of inspiration or aspirational desire, her public presence now regrettably generated only continuous reports concerning protracted legal disputes and ongoing conflicts, the two elements that established corporations endeavor most assiduously to avoid. The influential social cohort within California, which had once demonstrated such enthusiastic eagerness to welcome the newly arrived royals into their fold, has likewise begun a discernible process of distancing itself. Residents of the Montecito community, speaking on condition of extreme privacy, conveyed a palpable sense of mounting tension pervading the atmosphere. The stream of invitations extending to the most prestigious charitable galas, events that fundamentally dictate the rhythm of California's high society calendar, has dwindled to almost nothing. Even those luminaries in the media landscape who had previously offered the most robust and consistent endorsements of her endeavors, such as Oprah Winfrey and Gayle King, have maintained an uncharacteristic and conspicuous silence throughout this period of professional adversity. As one longtime neighbor succinctly summarized the prevailing sentiment, the industry has reached a collective and remarkably tranquil consensus that this particular venture has reached its predetermined conclusion. Perhaps the most profoundly astonishing transformation, however, is the unseen unfolding occurring within the very confines of the Sussex's residence. Individuals situated intimately near the family circle have been conveying the intelligence that Prince Harry has commenced initiating discreet, clandestine telephone conversations, endeavoring to ascertain if any avenue remains open for his potential re-entry into a functional capacity within London's sphere of influence. It must be clearly understood that this hypothetical scenario does not contemplate a full resumption of duties as a working royal dedicated to the crown. Rather, it envisions a far more subdued, a quiet return, primarily centered upon his previous charitable endeavors and commitments conducted well away from the relentless glare of public scrutiny. Nevertheless, the response emanating from the United Kingdom has reportedly been strikingly unyielding and exceedingly firm. It is understood that any conceivable pathway for the Duke's reintegration hinges critically upon a singular, immutable condition, one that sources connected to the offices of Princess Anne and Lady Louise Windsor insist cannot be altered under any circumstances. The Duchess must remain entirely excluded from any such arrangement. One individual employed within the royal household articulated this position with absolute clarity and without equivocation, stating, "The family harbors genuine affection and is certainly amenable to contemplating the welfare of their son, but they have reached a definitive conclusion regarding the associated turmoil. They are unequivocally finished with the incessant drama. There exists no viable route allowing both of them to return to the fold simultaneously. It represents an unavoidable choice between his fundamental inherited duty and the narrative they have diligently sought to construct and propagate from their current residence in California." Prince Harry, reportedly deeply unsettled and profoundly shaken by the intensely public humiliation inflicted upon his wife by a commercial entity he once regarded as occupying the absolute zenith of global prestige, is said to find himself caught in an agonizing predicament, suspended between conflicting loyalties. He witnessed, with stark realization, the moment the broader world ceased its complicity and tacit acceptance on the 7th day of February, and simultaneously perceived with alarming clarity that the protective barriers surrounding the entire Sussex brand were substantially more fragile than he had ever dared to imagine. Furthermore, the financial underpinnings of their endeavors are demonstrably deteriorating. The Archewell Foundation, in particular, has experienced a precipitous and substantial decline in the volume of financial contributions being received, evidenced by the highly significant withdrawal of backing from two major benefactors. This confluence of personal and fiscal pressures raises profound questions regarding the sustainability of their current trajectory.